We had arrived in Luxor the night before and settled into our cabin on the Royal Viking. Tours begin early in Egypt because of the heat, and breakfast was at 6:30 this morning so that we could set off to the temple of Queen Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut reigned as pharaoh for 22 years from 1479 BC and built this mortuary temple as a tribute to the god Amun. It's also the place where Muslim extremists killed 58 foreign tourists and 4 Egyptians in 1997, so there were plenty of armed police around. Hatshepsut is regarded as one of Egypt's most powerful pharaohs, reigning longer than any other Egyptian woman. Apart from many building projects, such as here and at Karnak, she's known for re-establishing trade networks in the Middle East and bringing a lot of wealth to her realm. And these expeditions, and the goods they brought with them, are commemorated in carvings at the temple. Hatshepsut's body was eventually placed in a tomb in the Valley of the Kings nearby. It was discovered by Howard Carter. She's believed to have had a genetic condition which caused her to have itchy, irritated skin. And it's thought more than likely that the skin lotion she used poisoned her and gave her bone cancer. She also had arthritis and bad teeth. All of these statues and walls were originally painted in bright colours and would have looked spectacular, and you can still see some traces of the colour today.
With few guarding posts, they thought they would be able to protect the tombs. In the Valley of the Kings, we've discovered till now we discovered 62 tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Not all the tombs were dedicated to kings. Some members of the royal families, but they were never kings. Prince Amen Mes is buried in the Valley of the Kings. The tombs, they vary in depth and also in steps. Please leave your cameras in the bus. Please stick together as one group. Just stay together, and at the end of each tour, we'll give enough free time to wander around and to take your photograph. Here there are no photographs.
And so the only film or photos we could take were of the largest coach park I've ever seen in my life. Once off the coach, we visited 3 tombs. We didn't pay extra to see the tomb of Tutankhamun and felt we really didn't need to. The wall paintings and hieroglyphics in the ones we saw were stunning and well lit, even though the air inside them was very stuffy and hotter than ever. After a visit to the neighbouring Valley of the Queens, we stopped at the Colossi of Memnon, 2 massive stone statues of the pharaoh Amenhotep III. The temple itself that surrounded them was destroyed by an earthquake around 1200 BC. and the statues were further damaged by another earthquake about 1,000 years later. And they're each about 60 feet high and weigh around 700 tons. We were very pleased with the Royal Viking. It was only a couple of years old and well fitted out. One of the things we'd been warned about was eating salads, because they tend to be the source of contamination on these Nile cruises. But in the middle of the week, I joined a group on a tour of the boat. The manager took us first into the dining room, where he talked about the intensive hygiene measures that were taken by the crew when cooking and preparing food. Having learned how all the water used is purified and treated much more than regulations demand, and how the salads are then washed in bottled mineral water, we changed our minds and decided that for our last few days we would tuck in. The kitchens were spotless. We were shown all the different areas and introduced to the staff who manned them. And then we were taken a floor down to the engine room. Amazingly, this seemed to be as clean as the kitchens were. We felt we could have eaten our food off the engine room floor quite safely. The rules of hygiene and cleanliness throughout the boat seemed to be extraordinary, and it's no wonder that none of the passengers suffered from any illness.
It's a free for all, isn't it? I don't care.
Obviously, it's an ex-Cairo taxi driver.
Yeah.
Oh, tell him, this is
We spent a few hours relaxing on deck before arriving at the Esna locks. When we reached our mooring spot to join the queue for the locks, we were amazed to see the boys and men on their rowing boats trying to sell galabeas and other items to all the passengers on the boats.
David, that man's looking for a size 10 for me, that is. How much? How much?
We were on the top deck, about 4 or 5 floors up from the water level, so if someone was interested in buying something, the guy would throw it, wrapped in plastic, up onto the deck. If a purchase was made, then the guy would throw up another one, the buyer would put the money inside that package, and then throw it back down again. More than once, one of the packages would end up in the water, but the boys didn't seem too bothered about that. While they stood on the front of their rowing boats doing the selling and haggling, the other half of their team would be rowing and trying to keep the boat from hitting others, from being hit by others, and from being squashed between the large cruisers. I have to say it passed a very entertaining hour or so. After breakfast today, we set off by coach through the city of Edfu. It's on the west bank of the Nile, with a population of about 60,000. The journey gave us a brief glimpse of traders going about their business, a little different from David Carter of Ilfracombe. We were here to visit the Temple of Horus, the god often portrayed as a falcon or a man with the head of a falcon. Again, imagine these walls painted with brilliant colours and huge flags flying from poles in these vertical recesses.
We can trace a piece of land, or they could trace a piece of land for thousands of years. It went from you to you to you to you to me. So this is the keeping, and also for the taxation, because when she pays you the money, you're going to pay the taxes. The Kulwell. So those two rooms, nobody lives there. Just a place for the records and place for the food we used to clean the temple with.
Our guide, Osama, explained that the temples were not just places of worship. They were social centres where records were kept and food distributed to the poor. When pharaohs or officials were depicted on wall carvings, we noticed that sometimes their heads or faces had been obliterated. That's what happened when they fell out of favour with future generations.
It's all these like better calling them like chapters, different chapters of the big religion of Egypt, and they developed over 5,000. The ancient Egyptian civilization,
It was always a pleasure to be up on deck when the boat was on the move. Apart from socialising, reading or playing Scrabble, there was so much to see. From our vantage point we could see signs of civilization, both modern and ancient. Quite why our captain had to make so much noise as we arrived at Com Ombo we'll never know. It might have been his way of ensuring that we moored up right by the main path to the temple. There were many boats there already, but he managed to do it, and we were able to spend nearly 2 hours there.
A little bit younger than the temple that we visited this morning. And although it's younger, you see that the temple is not as well preserved as the temple we visited this morning. The falling stones of this temple to build some houses in some villages nearby. For example, here, this symbol here, which is the honeybee, this is called Neso, which means upper. So they're talking about a city, Upper Egypt. And this is the indication, you see like cross here, circle and cross. This is the indication of a city. The beautiful board one in the south city. Okay? Indication of like breastfeeding child. The beautiful board child for the south city in the south, board. And then goes the text tube to measure the liquids, scissors, needles. They put the thread here. It's needles, scalpels, forceps of different shapes, scale for the medicine, hook drill to pull a nerve during surgery, the tools, and alcohol, fire and alcohol, and knives. You see the shapes of the knives, different shapes. Tractor of 4 arms and 3 arms to keep the wound open, triangle or square. Next to it here is a vertical.
This temple at Com Ombo was finished as late as about 55 BC. meaning that it was built about 1,500 years after the Temple of Hatshepsut. It was dedicated to two gods, the falcon-headed Horus and the crocodile god Sobek, associated with fertility. Apparently crocodiles used to sun themselves on the sandbanks around the temple, and about 300 mummified crocodiles were found here, some of which are on display in the Crocodile Museum at Aswan. Once it was dusk and a little cooler, we were back on board. Another 4 or 5 boats were moored against us out into the river. Our captain had no intention of letting them go first, so a lot of manoeuvring started, along with a lot of shouting. Once we were away from the shore, even by a few feet, it meant that the passengers of the other boats had no way to get across. So they became angry and started shouting as well, because they thought they were being left behind. It was a very noisy half hour. It was Egyptian night at dinner tonight. Some passengers had been buying their galabeas and headgear and were all dressed up. It all looked horrendous and embarrassing. And like John and Christine here, we went up on top deck to enjoy the warm evening and to get out of the way. We were quite happy to have missed it all. Had it been finished, this obelisk would have weighed about 1,200 tons. It was begun on the orders of Queen Hatshepsut, and it's believed that she intended it to be erected at the Temple of Karnak in Luxor.
Guys, we need a few people to go at the back.
Oh.
Because it's going like a submarine now. Go at the back, few people, please.
We need to go over the other side.
I think it's only legal for the life jacket. I'm not looking my best.
This temple was one of Egypt's most important shrines for over 800 years, until about 550 AD. When the lower dam was built, the temple was partially submerged for 6 months of the year. In 1932 the dam was heightened for the third time, and more of the temple went underwater every year. Visitors could row or even swim amongst the colonnades and look down through the water to the wall carvings. And when the high dam was built, Philae was threatened with total submersion. So barriers were put around the temple and the water pumped out. Then, stone by stone, the temple was dismantled and rebuilt on higher ground. It was an incredible achievement, as everything now looks as if it had been in place there forever.
I tell you about the story on the island of Philae where it took place. The story started with the creation. God created everything, the sun God. He created the God gift, the God of the earth. And then the goddess moon, the goddess of the sky. Then he created the God of the earth. After it was found, the goddess Isis became pregnant. And she took herself down to the marshes of this and the north. Among the papyrus plants, the symbol of protection, that's why they use it for protection. Up the stairs.
The temple walls are, as usual, covered in carvings and hieroglyphs, but instead of being carved into the stone, they're in relief, which means the rest of the walls were carved away to leave the figures standing out.
Square, like a house, house, shelter, Horus inside, the house of the shelter of the Horus. Behind that, you see perfumes giving to the goddess Isis, although the face is gone, but we can see from the inscriptions here, the chair, Izitsa Horus, Isis the mother of Horus, and Horus as a young child carrying the Ankh symbol in a suckling scene with his mother.
In the afternoon, when the sandstorm had died down and it was a little cooler, we walked into Aswan to find the souk, stroll around and take in some of the atmosphere. All the traders here were much friendlier and less aggressive than those we'd met in other towns and tourist spots. It was a very early start this morning for the long 3-hour drive to Abu Simbel. We went in a huge convoy of coaches. And we had to do this for safety after the terrorist attack on tourists 4 years earlier. So we sat back, watched the sun come up over the desert, and opened the breakfast boxes we'd been given. We were stunned by our first view of the temples at Abu Simbel. There were hundreds of people there, but it didn't matter as the queues to enter them moved very quickly. As at Philae, when the new Aswan Dam was built, these temples were due to be submerged completely. A salvage operation began and the temples were moved, stone by stone, here to higher ground over a period of 5 years from 1966 to 72. And because the whole of both temples, including the delicate colossal statues on the facade, were all part of the mountain itself, this was an incredibly complex operation. But thousands of blocks of stone, some weighing 15 tons, were moved 200 feet higher and rebuilt. A concrete dome protects the temples themselves from pressure, and this was then hidden inside a new mountain which was built around them. But still though, twice a year, on the 22nd of February and the 22nd of October, the dawn rays of the sun penetrate to the heart of Ramesses' temple to reach the sanctuary and the statues of the gods which are placed there. And having followed the progress of this project in the newspapers back in the 60s, it was a dream come true to actually be here and see the place for myself. One of the most amazing spectacles is the wall on which is carved detail of the Battle of Kadesh, where the young Ramesses confronted the Hittites in Syria. There are over 1,100 figures on the entire wall from top to bottom, showing the march of the Egyptian army with its infantry and charioteers, hand-to-hand combat, prisoners, either dead, injured, or running away and leaving their overturned chariots behind them. In Queen Nefertari's temple, the mood is softer and more family-oriented, apart from the portrayal of the queen watching admiringly as her husband kills his enemies. After a late lunch on the Royal Viking, we were taken on a short walk along the Corniche to board a felucca to take us across to Kitchener's Island. In return for his military achievements in Sudan, Kitchener was given this island, for which he collected exotic plants and seeds from around the world. Well, now it's known as the Aswan Botanical Gardens, a cool respite from the heat and sand of the surrounding desert.
Alright guys, that was it. We're going back to shore now.
It didn't surprise us, or indeed take very long, for an armed security guard to join us and want to start showing us the different plants, seeds, spices and herbs that were growing on the island. It didn't surprise us either that the only reason he was doing this was to supplement his income. He seemed very pleased with a tip of 5 Egyptian pounds, which is about 58 pence. We were told that a reasonable income in Egypt for, say, a bus driver was about 500 Egyptian pounds a month, or about 58 pounds sterling. A security guard would probably earn less than that. The island was a beautiful spot, calming and refreshing, and we could understand why it wasn't just tourists who were taking advantage of it. And of course, wherever you go in Egypt, there's someone trying to part you from your money.
Don't have any single in this group, so has anybody left his wife or her husband or anything on the island? Are all here then?